Hello. Today I'd like to introduce you to Joe Harding's second D.I. Byron Unsworth's novel. D.I. Byron Unsworth is the reluctant detective. This novel is called The Sapperton Affair. Here is the blurb. A gentle canal holiday turns into a grotesque and brutal nightmare for retired D.I. Byron Unsworth and his disabled wife, Marlene. A chance encounter with an old informant promises a welcome distraction for Marlene. Two girls have been missing for a number of years in the area. Someone is manipulating the investigation, and as the evidence piles up, the case takes a bizarre and dangerous turn. The second in the D.I. Unsworth, The Reluctant Detective series. Here is a review. A thoroughly engaging whodunit. Another exciting page-turner as Joe's use of vivid description and the English language shine through. The plot has an unexpected twist and transports you through the beauty of a gentle canal holiday, keeping you enthralled. His characters have now taken on their own unique style, and hopefully there will be many more with the reluctant detective and his invalid wife. Can't wait for number 3. Here is another review. As a volunteer on the restoration of the canal, it was good to read about the canal in the future and the work of the volunteers acknowledged. Well written and a good plot ending was a surprise. Could relate and identify the many locations mentioned, even if they are not currently accessible by boat. The towpath walk is worth doing. Here is my review. Joe Harding really gets into his stride with The Sapperton Affair, with retired detective Byron Unsworth and his wife Marlene playing a greater role. Being wheelchair-bound doesn't lessen Marlene's aim as she steps up the pace with a beautifully lobbed vol-au-vent to the head of a corrupt and octopus-armed millionaire who assumes a modern droit de seigneur in the area, while pulling every string he can to stop the reopening of a disused canal tunnel. More characters this time, which does require some getting ducks in a row for early chapters, with the extended family, a grandson who could be a burden on what is to be a peaceful narrowboat holiday, a suspiciously all too ready to help a boat owner with a secret, boating dropouts with dark histories, and an ice-cool PA one line short of a political spin doctor. A missing girl becomes 2 missing girls, and maybe more, something the Unsworths cannot let lie. The narrowboat life, supposedly tranquil, even romantic, comes with dangers ranging from deadly fungi to disused tunnel air vents, where the dead could lie hidden for eternity. Despite warnings, Byron and Marlene enter the lion's den, and they soon find themselves on the victim list. Another victim could well be their young grandson, John. The tempo picks up and charges, forcing you to read on, not only to find out the identity of the killer, but to see if our family will survive intact. Joe Harding excels in 3 areas with his writing: the little moments of history dotted about, the gentle lulls into a false sense of security as we glide through autumnal countryside, with plenty of stops at canal-side pubs, towpath walks, and dewy mornings contrasting with the roller coaster of death and near death when the action picks up. Stronger writing than Death in the Last Carriage, although I'd certainly recommend that as a starting point with Byron Unsworth, with a wider range of characters, with more depth to them, greater strains in relationships, and a plot to keep you guessing, at times even dreading the outcome that is certain to be harrowing. A few excerpts to give you a taste of a writer I am happy to recommend to lovers of intrigue, danger, and suspense in leafy England. Daylight was flooding the cabin when Byron awoke. He glanced at his watch. 7:10. The last 3 mornings he had allowed himself the luxury of a long lie-in, but his internal clock had been set by years of early rising to travel to work, and his body punished him for such indulgence by nagging headaches, usually exacerbated by the wine. This morning, however, he rose with a clear head and resolved to seize the day. Having dressed and leaving Marlene asleep, he gently eased himself through the swing doors and sniffed the air. A sharp frost rimed the vegetation alongside the canal. The air was clear and the pearly sky uncluttered by clouds. Sounds of activity permeated the valley, mainly from the road. According to the guidebook, the next stretch would be very different as the canal set off up its own valley, leaving main roads and railway line behind. Abandoned fish ponds, old mill buildings and water meadows lay ahead as the Coombe narrowed to Sycorage's Wood and the canal plunged into Sapperton Tunnel. Between that and now lay many locks raising the level upwards over 130 feet. Locks that thundered water as they filled and emptied. Heavy gates that refused to budge until the water levels were equal both sides, then swung sluggishly open. Bystanders sometimes offered to help, but more often Byron had to dash from one gate or sluice to the next. At first he had sweated freely, even in the weakening autumn sun, but by now he had developed a method, a dance from gate beams to sluices, then back to boat, and he was aware that he was getting used to the activity. Yesterday he had woken up with an aching back. Today just a twinge. What was more, he was eating almost constantly between meals, stoking his body for the next set of winding and heaving. At first he almost regretted their decision to navigate this waterway, but now he felt a deep satisfaction and a sense of achievement. By the time they returned the boat to Saul Junction, he might not weigh less, but he would be well toned, and Marlene would hurt her finger if she prodded his midriff. According to the guide, an open all-hours store was half a mile down the valley. He was about to set off to get some cereal for John when he remembered Tom's spare keys. Lifting the hatch, he fished around in the engine well. Nothing. Sorry, Tom. Marlene was still asleep when he returned. He tiptoed past her to the front cabin. As he entered, a pair of watchful eyes met his gaze. Morning, mate. Lovely day. Ready for some proper boating? He tugged the curtains apart. John began to reply, but his words stumbled. He tried again, but it was as though his brain was feeding the utterances faster than his mouth could deliver them. Byron waited patiently. This had started early last year, and they had quickly learned not to anticipate or guess what he was saying. The child tried again, the words tumbling out in the wrong order, and now tears were welling up. Byron sat on the bed beside him and took John's hands. Deep breath, he instructed, keeping his voice low. Another, and again. Good. He could feel the tension in the boy's body transmitting itself through his hands. It was vital that John saw he was content to wait until he could articulate his words slowly. Otherwise his pent-up anxiety would render him incapable of speaking at all. The boy breathed in and out, and the trembling subsided. A minute later he tried again. Byron braced himself in readiness to explain what his dad was in hospital for. Why do we drive on the left? It was typical of John's questions. He would solemnly ask things that would never occur to anyone. This was something else Byron, especially, had learned. Never make light of their grandson's queries. There was usually a good reason why he asked, and it was sometimes necessary to prod further into what prompted the question rather than launch into an answer. Why do you ask? He asked softly. This time John was relaxed enough to get his reply out in the second attempt. He had been looking at the traffic cameras around the world and wondering why some countries had different regimes and customs. That's a very good question, he said at length. I know, John said, without a hint of self-congratulation. Then, do you drive the boat on the left as well? Most of the time, Byron chuckled and related to him their accident on Sunday. Listen, we'll get some breakfast and have a think about why. I've got your cereal, and we can have bacon and eggs if you like. The boy was sufficiently relaxed to reply straight away. Yes, he would like cooked breakfast. His huge eyes set in his round head came to rest on Byron's face. I won't forget, he said. Over breakfast they discussed the relative customs of countries around the world with respect to road usage. No clear answer emerged, despite Marlene's best endeavours on the internet. However, John seemed satisfied with their efforts. Byron produced the Canal textbook he had bought in Brinscombe. "I got this for you, mate. I thought it was right up your street." John inspected the book. The... Easy, love. Deep breath, Marlene said softly. "Thank you," he wheezed. "Then I'll have to finish my book first." He was reading Wild Things, Plants and Fungi of Great Britain. They both smiled. John was in a class of his own. So it was, by means of gentle prompting him to take 2 or 3 deep breaths before speaking, they managed to unwind some of the anxiety from him. Soon they were underway, the valley's sides closing in on the waterway as they ascended lock after lock. Sometimes the trees lining the canal formed a tunnel, other times they emerged into sparkling stretches of water reflecting the clear blue skies. Bridge after bridge came into sight, some so low it seemed as if they would have no clearance room at all. "Couldn't ask for better weather," Byron observed, his skin tingling from the sunshine. John was dexterously clambering along the narrow ledge that ran the outside length of their vessel, alternately standing stock still at the prow like a figurehead, then returning to make some profound observation. "Make the most of it." Marlene had been checking the forecast. "Rain at the weekend." She nodded towards their grandson. "He's grown, hasn't he? Think he'll be all right?" "I guess so." "In that case, I'm going to have another look through the case notes." She pressed the button and the lift whirred her down below. Once more, Byron felt irritated. She was becoming fixated with this case. Every opportunity to slope off and hunch over the laptop. He felt like shouting at her. "Never mind missing girls. What about your grandchild?" John scrambled back along the outside of the boat. It was clutching something spiky. "Teasel," he indicated the head, nestled like a spiny egg on a stick. They... Byron inhaled deeply, then pursed his lips to exhale, and John followed his lead, then tried again. "They used them to brush the wool before they wove it," he informed him. "This area was the centre of the wool trade." The nugget of knowledge shared, he scrambled back to the prow. They were cruising through a wooded stretch of canal. The mature trees and hazel saplings formed a tunnel in places, the sunlight flickering through the remaining leaves. John had snatched a few more plants and was eagerly trying to identify them. Byron knew a few of the wildflowers he could see, the ubiquitous cow's parsley, which sprang up so swiftly in early summer, now just stalks, hollow tubes, brittle and dry in the pervasive old man's beard, which had relinquished its bright berries in favour of straggly white tufts that scrambled and rambled over the hedge-tops. Thirsty and peeved with Marlene, Byron pulled over and cut the engine. "Time for tea and toast," he called to John, who leapt from the prow and seized the mooring rope. Together they secured the boat. Marlene appeared. "Why have we stopped?" she asked. "I just need a break." If she picked up his tone of voice, she made no comment. "Did you look for Tom's spare keys?" Byron had forgotten Tom's message. He dialed. Amazingly, there was a signal. "Tom, that you? Listen, I looked for the keys. They're not on the boat. Did you have any luck finding them?" Tom's fruity tones assured him that he had, that they were lying on the grass just outside his yard. "Thanks for looking. Sorry. Should have got back to you. Everything all right?" "Is that Tom?" Marlene hissed. "I need to ask him something." "Yes, we're all good. My wife wants a word. Glad you found them." He handed the phone to Marlene and listened as she explained about John. As expected, there was no issue. The boat had a capacity of 6 persons. So long as they didn't exceed that, he didn't mind who came aboard. As she seemed about to ring off, he pricked up his ears as he heard her asking something else. "Tom, did Emily Caudle have a friend with the initials KT?" He conjectured Tom's reply from her subsequent comments. A few times in Emily's messages she made mention of someone by the initials KT. Several messages were directly addressed to KT. Friendly, chatty messages of little consequence, but they represented a loose thread in the investigation. Tom had been asked this before. He had no knowledge of anyone, male or female, with those initials. He rang off. John was doing something on the bank, his fluorescent life vest lighting up as the sunlight caught it through the trees overhead. Byron brewed tea and made toast, trying to keep the lid on his annoyance by asking her what she had found. Marlene buttered her toast and relayed the messages sent at intervals over a few months, typical of a young woman's communications with a friend with whom she made a point of staying in touch. They were not deeply personal, but informative. The responses were similar in tone, chatty, keep in touch replies, but nothing to suggest really close friendship. Then they broke off for a very simple reason. KT stopped replying. Emily had sent 3 more text messages to her friend, the last being a terse reminder, "I'm always here if you want to talk." "Another missing girl?" Marlene suggested. Byron was about to snap at her that she was becoming a missing person herself when a voice called down, "Excuse me, I don't want to bother you, but I wonder if I can speak to you." She introduced herself as Grace Johnson. She was the picture of a stereotypical English matron, medium height, clad in practical walking clothes, heavy boots, rucksack, and brandishing a telescopic walking pole. Curly, unkempt hair around a stern but not unfriendly face. She was walking on a hiking tour of the Wisses Way, a long-distance path which ran to Monmouth along this stretch of the canal, when she had spotted their grandson carrying a small fungus in his hand. She had told him sharply to drop it and had snatched his hand to prevent him putting it near his mouth. Not surprisingly, John had become almost incoherent with shock at being so accosted. "You must understand," she spoke rapidly. "I would be alarmed myself if I saw a stranger snatching a child's hand, but I simply had to stop him. He had to put it down. I couldn't let him carry it back. I hope you don't mind." "Carry what back?" Marlene breathed. She flourished a small polythene bag. "Amanita phalloides." The bag contained a greenish-brown mushroom sweating slightly against the polythene. Her other hand still gripped John's wrist. He looked scared. "Amanita what?" Byron was wondering if she was slightly balmy. Beside him, Marlene called, "Come here, please." Thankfully, the stranger released John's hand and he darted across to them. "Please, he must wash his hands. Now. I'll explain, but don't let him touch his mouth." "Go wash your hands." Marlene gave him a gentle push in the direction of the shower room. "You need to destroy this." Grace Johnson handed the bag and its fungal contents across to them. "It's called the death cap for a good reason." Okay, another little piece here, just a snippet as things start to ratchet up. Their grandson had covered a surprising distance in the time available. He had descended the valley, crossed the infant River Frome by means of a bridge of railway sleepers, and headed into the woods that cloaked the opposite slope. The boundary hedge stretched to the stream and up to the woods, but thereafter reverted to a high green mesh fence that curved around to the right to above where the canal tunnel opened out on this side of the valley. A cold chill ran up his spine, and he quickened his pace. "John!" he called, feeling a different type of sweat starting down his back. He reached to the stream and crossed the bridge, quickening his pace. John was no slouch. He could walk fast for one quite young, but after another 3 minutes, with still no sign of him, Byron couldn't keep the quiver out of his voice. "John!" In the woods, lower down, a chainsaw gang were working. The noise, like a manic sheep bleating, rose and fell in pitch, smothering his cries. "Meow." A wood pigeon paused in its mellow calling to listen. The woods ahead were well into their autumn splendor, russets and rust contrasting with darker evergreens. A copper beech overhung the path that trailed off amongst the trees. Byron was about to take it when the thought struck him. Did he double back to the canal to look at the tunnel? No, that was unlikely. John could be very singular in his objectives when the mood was on him, but he wouldn't leave the grounds of Sapperton Manor without permission. "John, it's time for lunch." Damn that chainsaw. Just give me a few moments' peace, will you? A little way through the trees, a small wooden building caught his eye. It was some way off the path, and no clear track ran to it. But it was at least an objective. Almost running now, Byron crashed through the dying bracken and brambles, some still bearing sodden, oven-ripe blackberries, and reached the hut. As he came round the side, his heart skipped a beat. A young figure lying still on the ground, his face to the grass. "John, are you all right?" To his immense relief, the boy turned at his call. He had been peering into a space under the hut. "What are you doing?" Byron's relief was turning to anger. Realizing he was in trouble, John fumbled his answer more than usual. He began, the words cluttering up in his mouth. He jabbed his finger on the map, and Byron could see tears were beginning. Taking a deep breath to stifle his irritation, he pulled John to his feet and held his shoulders. "Okay, soldier, nice deep breath, okay? Tell me what you see." By degrees, the answer emerged. John had been looking for the air shafts to the tunnel. He had been inspecting the map, and his unusual mind had determined the probable distance of the first one from the Daneway tunnel entrance. "How in the world could you work that out?" Byron demanded, wonderingly, his anger draining away. "The tunnel was in the book they had given him," John explained. "Diagrams showed that the tunnel shafts were more or less evenly spaced along the length of the structure. Many were marked on the Ordnance Survey map, but others were long since indistinguishable from the earth and vegetation around, or overgrown with trees. There were 25, and the tunnel was just over 3 kilometers in length, so a simple bit of maths meant that if you went 150 meters or thereabouts from the tunnel entrance, you should reach an air shaft. "And that's what you were looking for?" John nodded, trying to decide whether he was still in trouble. Byron smiled. "Show me." From where John had been lying on the ground, a clear view was possible under the shed, which was raised on 6 concrete blocks. "What am I looking for?" Byron's eyes took a while to accustom themselves, but he could see that the ground beneath the shed formed a large circular depression about 8 feet across. He tugged at handfuls of straggly grass away to get a better view. Yes, it was definitely a feature, a bowl-shaped cavity about 15 inches lower in the middle. "Yes, I think you're right." Byron scrambled to his feet. "Well found. Now we shall go look for some food. I'm starving." But he didn't set off back to the house. There was something altogether odd about this setup. Something that tickled his professional instincts. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope it's given you a good taste of the writing of Joe Harding.